So at the time, I think I was about 45, and I was actually right before my 45th birthday, so about 44. And I started to experience some changes in my body, feeling symptom wise as well as physically. So I started to gain weight. I started to gain more cellulite, so more fat. I started to deal with gastrointestinal issues, bloating, also pain in my stomach after I ate certain foods. And then also insomnia. I had trouble falling asleep as well as night waking. All of those were kind of manageable, not ideal, but as most women, I just kind of white knuckled it through and figured, it's a part of aging, whatever. And so my anxiety though started getting really, really bad. And so my doctor put me on Wellbutrin for my anxiety, and it seemed to be doing pretty well until one day I noticed I was starting to have an arrhythmia. I was born with a natural arrhythmia, so it's not something that I was super concerned about until the palpitations started escalating. They got to the point where it's kind of like, you're like in labor and you're timing the contractions. I was like having my husband literally like time like the amount of space in between my palpitations. They got so bad that I almost passed out. And it was at that moment I was like, take me to emergency. So my husband rushed me to emergency. They did an EKG. They did a bunch of tests. My heart was fine. They basically sent me home 3 hours later after a battery of tests and said I was fine. Go see your, general practitioner. So I did. I had a great GP, showed up, for an appointment, an emergency appointment. He checked me out. He saw the scans. Everything looked fine. He's like, maybe you're under a lot of stress. I told him that I was on Wellbutrin and that wasn't helping my anxiety anymore. And so not that he didn't want to help me, but there really wasn't much that he could do. And so the months after that, following that, my symptoms escalated. It got to the point where I was literally showing up at his office unannounced, crying in the lobby until he would see me. And at that point, he had run blood tests, all the things that all women go through when they're starting to feel symptoms and they don't know what's going on with them. They had ruled out all of the major things. And what was left was, we don't know, looks normal. Until out of sheer desperation, I was sobbing. I've had this doctor for like 15, 16 years. He's treated my whole family. And I said, I need help. I don't know what's going on with me. I started doing some of my own research. Could I have maybe a hormonal issue? I didn't even know what hormones were. And he's like, Mrs. Topete, we're not going to treat your test results. We're going to treat your symptoms. Well, there's a novel approach. So he recommended a couple of things, some progesterone cream, a couple of other supplements. And that started my journey because while I started to feel better, I wasn't feeling myself. While my symptoms were improving, I wasn't feeling normal. And I didn't like the trajectory that I was going on. I wasn't willing to white knuckle it through the rest of my life until my hormones shifted again. And so that's when I really got involved in hormones and health and completely changing my lifestyle to support this new shift in my life.
Mm. Really scary, I'm sure. And I know a lot of women seeing this interview maybe won't have had exactly the same symptoms, but probably other symptoms that have been equally scary and devastating. And they feel that there's large aspects of their lives that are shut down. They can't do the things they normally want to do. I just wanted to touch on, you talked about the anxiety, and that's something that I've heard other people talk about, other coaches, but also other clients that I've spoken with, that anxiety, this is something that seems to come out more during perimenopause and menopause. What is going on there? What is behind the anxiety?
So it can be a number of different things. It depends specifically what's going on with your hormones. The large majority of my clients, whether they're in perimenopause, menopause, or postmenopause, have some degree of something called estrogen dominance. And estrogen dominance it's not a disease. You can't take medication for it. It's not even a condition. It's really a metabolic state. And it's a state in which your estrogen levels in your blood are higher than your progesterone levels. And that imbalance creates this disparity in your hormones that leads to a cavalcade of symptoms. There's about 25 symptoms on my self diagnostic of estrogen dominance alone. So some of the ones that I described you may be experiencing, some of which you might not be experiencing. That might manifest in different ways. There's also a great deal of women who have adrenal dysfunction, and that actually often accompanies estrogen dominance because there's this symbiotic kind of relationship between our body and cortisol and progesterone. So if you have lower progesterone to estrogen, you can have estrogen dominance. And what happens is if you are under a great amount of stress or chronic stress just for over a long period of time, which most women in our age group experience, especially as caregivers in our life, right? What can happen is your body so desperately wants to make cortisol, and your cortisol is so depleted that it goes elsewhere in your body to create cortisol. That's the magic of the human body. The magic is that we can create cortisol from something else in our body. The bad news is that what it does is the body steals progesterone to make cortisol. So if our progesterone was low already, now we're really in trouble. And so this can lead to all sorts of mood issues, not just anxiety. It can lead to rage. It can lead to depression. It can lead to anxious depression, weepiness. I was actually reading an article recently, and it turns out that me and Oprah Winfrey have something in common. She actually experienced estrogen dominance with the same symptoms that I did. And, she has access to the very best doctors in the world and the resources to do so. And she went to doctor after doctor after doctor after doctor, trying to figure out what was going on with her. At first, she thought she was having heart issues. And so after she saw a cardiac specialist and ruled that out, she started to go to other doctors. Not until like her 8th doctor did somebody say, you know what, we think you have a hormonal imbalance. So if Oprah Winfrey has to go through all of these hoops to get help, imagine what the average woman has to go through.
It's so frustrating. And this is something that I hear a lot as well. And that is that women are not feeling heard or well supported through the medical profession. And that's something I experienced as well. My own doctor told me that the symptoms I kept describing were in my head, which wasn't helpful. And I think it's also important to point out, as you've said, we're all different. So our symptoms could be different, one woman to another, but there's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing wrong. This is a sort of a naturally occurring thing, and it can be fixed with the right kind of treatment, I suppose, in the right area, and that is hormone. That's the hormone, which is so foundational. So what?
If I could add one thing, I wanted to interject, and this is really, really important. Something I tell most of my clients when they come back to me, or I'm doing an initial call, and they said, well, my doctor said, first off, I have nothing against doctors. I wholeheartedly support the medical community. I'm the first person, if I need surgical intervention or medication, sign me up. I'm not like, I'm going to white knuckle it and just, think good thoughts and hope that it goes away, or, drink coconut oil, right? Which cures everything, apparently. I'm not one of those, crunchy granola people. I believe in doctors. However, I believe that the medical system is failing doctors. The medical system is not equipping doctors properly. Mm-hmm. There is only 20% of all medical schools in the world that offer perimenopause and menopause classes. Mm-hmm. And that coursework is elective. So most of the people that do take it are in the, gynecology specialty, but 20%, that means 80% of our doctors aren't equipped. Mm-hmm. To make matters worse, they're only given traditional means of dealing with hormonal imbalance. So that's either going to be surgical or intervention, like a hysterectomy or a partial hysterectomy, or that's going to be hormonal intervention, which is going to be hormone replacement therapy or birth control, or that's going to be a band-aid for symptoms like an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication. All very important and valuable medications when used correctly, but when they're just a band-aid for an underlying cause, eventually that those symptoms are going to exceed what that band-aid is able to cover up. And
Mhm.
so for many women that can't take hormone replacement therapy because they have a family history of female cancer or blood clotting disorders, that leaves all of those women, think of all of the women who are, either have had or survivors of or have family history of uterine cancer, cervical cancer, breast cancer, blood clotting issues that can't even take hormone therapy.
Mhm.
And traditional medicine's solution for them is, which to me is just incredibly discriminatory
Mhm.
towards women. And so there needs to be an escalation in the medical community, I believe, where they're given the tools to be able to help women because they're still the first line of defense. What happens when you think you have a hormonal issue? The very first thing is you go to your doctor. And when your doctor tells you you're fine, you're normal, you're too young for this, it's in your head. Um, a lot of women just don't know where to go from there.
Yeah. It's just so frustrating. So, Monica, how do you work with a woman? So a woman comes to you and she's got these symptoms, she doesn't know what's going on. What's the starting point for you? Where do you begin and then where do you go from there?
Yeah. So I know we're going to kind of talk about my freebie a little bit towards the end, but it has a lot to do with where I start in the process because I do not help people unless I understand what's going on hormonally. Someone could come to me and say, I have XYZ symptoms. Is there something that I can take? And even if there is, it's not like I'm trying to be stingy and not share the wealth. I love helping women, but it's irresponsible for me to recommend a supplement or a food to stay away from or try or what have you when I don't know what the root cause is. So, being the hormone detective, I've realized that this whole hormone thing is a big, huge puzzle. We need to understand what's going on hormonally, and we also need to understand that we all have something called bio-individuality. So while there may be some protocols that are in general good for women who have estrogen dominance, there might be some foods that are reactive to women who have estrogen dominance. You could have two people that have estrogen dominance but have bioindividuality, and therefore they react different chemically to different supplements, they react different chemically to different foods, they react different chemically to when you change the chemistry of foods, whether a food is raw or cooked. There's so many components, including exercise. There's some exercise that's great for different hormonal imbalances, and there's other exercises that will send your hormonal balance through the roof. So I need to really understand what's going on. So that's the first thing that we do. It's kind of like a mechanic. You can't diagnose what's wrong until you take a look under the hood. And so that's what we do with our with the self-assessment symptom diagnostic that I give